Guys, good afternoon. It is a beautiful, beautiful August day here at the beach. My name is Jay Marsden. I'm with the Marsden Law Group. And the purpose of coming to you from the beach is to talk about today's topic. And today's topic is how to protect your beach house, right? So we thought, where else to do it? We bring it down here. I know I look terrible in the dark here, but you have an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous view of Cape Cod. This is Lewis Bay here. This is right off of 28 down in Yarmouth, Massachusetts. And so here we are today to talk about how to protect your beach house. So why are we talking about protecting your beach house? Well, let's talk about why it's important. In many cases, whether it's a beach house, whether it's a lake house, whether it's somebody's mountain ski, ski resort, house, condo, whatever you want to talk about, these are typically places where people find this to be a familial gathering place. A lot of memories are made there. There's a lot of reasons that people go out and pursue the idea of a beach house or a lake house or a camp somewhere in the woods. But really the idea is it's a way for people to come together, spend time together, and make a ton of memories. Maybe mom and dad bought it, maybe some grandparents did it, but the idea is at some point down the road, there's a piece of property in the family that has real sentimental attachment to it, and we want to figure out what's the best way to keep those moments of sentimentality moving on into the future and not necessarily creating a problem where there's some type of family dynamic that can kind of wreck things. And so at the end of the day, what we try to tell people is, here's what you don't want to do. You don't want to put yourself in a position where at the end of the day, something happens and this cherished piece of property ends up going through the probate process, which can be a challenging process in and of itself for any piece of property, but it can also add some difficult challenges when it comes to different types of vacation properties because of the additional idea of the cost and the maintenance and the upkeep that goes along with these properties. And sometimes these properties get a little bit forgotten about in the off season, and then it comes back into vogue when the weather gets better or when the snow flies. And so you really want to figure out what's the best way to kind of pull this whole thing together. So our first suggestion is, you don't want to leave this property in a position where somebody has to jump through a whole bunch of hoops at the probate court to kind of take control and carry out your wishes as the person leaving the beach house to the family. We're going to talk about beach houses today, but this applies to any type of vacation property where memories are made. So there's three ways that we want to see you take the lead on protecting your beach property or your beach house or your lake house. But again, for purposes of this conversation, we're going to keep referring it to the beach house. Why? Because I love the beach. Go figure, right? Pasty white Irish kid loves the beach. I know, it sounds crazy. But anyway, three ways that we want to think about when we talk about with our clients protecting your beach house. The first way to do it is to hold that cherished family property in what we would call a revocable trust. Now, this is a situation where you own all the control that goes with this property. Meaning if something happens and you want to sell it, you need the cash to pay for long-term care costs. That's all not a big deal because you stay in charge. The revocable trust is really designed as a pure probate avoidance mechanism. The property can go to whoever you name as the beneficiaries of the trust. Could be kids, could be grandkids, could be siblings, it's whatever you want. But the idea is that you want to stay in control, and if something ever were to happen, you want the property to pass easily in a very straightforward fashion right to whoever you want to ultimately get this beach house, okay? Now, here's what the revocable trust does not do for you. It doesn't give you any benefits when it comes to Medicaid and long-term care planning. If you are in control of the property, down the road, somebody takes sick, somebody ever needs long-term care costs, with the expectation that those long-term care costs are going to be covered by Medicaid, property in a revocable trust does not get the starting of the clock for the 5-year look back for Medicaid planning purposes. If you can retain control of it for the fun stuff, then you also retain control of it for the not so fun stuff. But as we mentioned, probate avoidance, you retain control, and if something happens to you, your kids get a step up in basis. You know, a lot of these vacation properties, a lot of people sit around and talk about, you know, I got this property a million years ago, I paid $22,000 for it. If that's the case, and it's now worth $1 million because you were smart enough 50, 60 years ago to buy a piece of property right on the water, and all my realtor friends always tell me water equals equity, now that property value, you would get a step up in basis for the people who inherit it, so that if they decide to sell it down the road, there's no issues that you need to worry about from a tax perspective. They get a step up in basis, they sell it, everything's fine, they're good to go, no capital gains taxes on them. So one way to hold your property, revocable trust. You retain all the control, avoid probate, goes where you want it to go, okay? The second way to own property is to take a piece of property and do what's called a deed with a life estate. Now what this means is you are taking the property and you are giving it to your kids, for example, and you are reserving the right to live there for the rest of your life. Deed with the life estate. Here you go, kids. The beach house is yours, but I've reserved the right to live here and use this property for the rest of my life. You guys can't kick me out. Now, that also does a couple of other things for you. It's a probate avoidance scheme. Something happens to you, the beach house goes to the kids. The kids don't have to jump through any hoops at the probate court. They just get the property because that's the way the title was set up, because you were smart enough to do a deed with a life estate. The other thing that this also gives the kids is a step up in basis. You bought the property for $20,000 a million years ago. It's now worth $2 million because it's right on the water. The kids get a step up in basis. If they sell it, all of that gain goes away. So they also get a step up in basis. The third thing that it does is it does start the clock ticking for Medicaid planning purposes. So if you have a property, you have a beach house, you give it to the kids, you retain a life estate. When you retain a life estate, you get all the benefits of living there, you get all the burdens of living there. You get to pay all the bills, you get to pay the insurance, you get to shake out the sand all out of the rugs, but you get also all the benefits of living there, which is you probably get access to the beach sticker and nobody can kick you out. And it also starts the clock ticking for Medicaid planning purposes. So 5 years and a day from now, that interest that you've passed to your kids is free and clear from a Medicaid planning perspective. That's important if you're concerned about long-term care and will this cherished family asset that we would love to see go to our kids so they can make memories, will this become an asset for Medicaid planning purposes? Deed with the life estate starts the clock ticking for Medicaid planning purposes. Avoids probate, people get a step up in basis, and you get to continue to use and enjoy the property. Now, it almost sounds too good to be true. Is there a downside of the deed to a life estate? There is a downside. The downside is when your kids inherit the property, they're all going to inherit the property together, right? And if this is a type of family dynamic where nobody can agree on what type of appetizer to get when you go out to dinner, whose house we should go to for Thanksgiving, how should we handle the family Christmas, Yankee swap, then owning property together could be a disaster. You may not want to do that. You may not want to put a bunch of people in a situation where they own property together when they can't agree on the time of day. Putting them in this position could create real problems. You need to really think about the dynamic and whether or not people should be owning property together. That's a deed with the life estate. The third option that we talk about when people want to own property, especially when they talk about the beach house, for example, is do I put the beach house into what's called an irrevocable trust? We talked about a revocable trust. We talked about the deed with the life estate. This is an irrevocable trust. And like the name sort of implies, the concept, the idea behind it is when you set it up, it's irrevocable. You don't have a lot of flexibility to make a lot of changes. Usually, in a situation like this, one of the kids, couple of the kids, whatever you want to do, they might be the trustees, of the irrevocable trust, which means they would be in charge. You transfer the property into the irrevocable trust, you pick a kid, you pick two kids, they are now in charge. A week after you do this, You say to yourself, that Marsden guy has no idea what he was talking about. You tell the kids, I want the house back. The kids could say to you, no go, we're not giving the house back. And now you're in kind of a tough spot because you have given up control. Now, this does a couple of things for you. By getting it out of your name, by transferring it to the kids, that works out really well from a Medicaid planning perspective. 5 years and a day from now, the beach house is not considered part of your assets if somebody was to need to apply for Medicaid. So that's a win, that's a benefit. You also get probate avoidance. The trust is irrevocable. The trust lays out the rules as to what's supposed to happen if you're not around. That property would go to the beneficiaries, no probate. The downside of an irrevocable trust is over the past couple of years, they have clarified the tax situation. So you may find yourself in a position where if you paid $20,000 for that piece of property on the beach way back in the day, and now you transfer it to the irrevocable trust, when the kids go to sell it, they may have a $2 million plus or minus capital gain that they would have to pay. Because when you put property into an irrevocable trust, the basis, your cost basis, what you paid for it, it follows the property. So when the kids go to transfer the property to a third-party buyer, there's a capital gain issue that they're going to have to deal with now that they're transferring the property to somebody else. So the irrevocable trust, to sum it up, you're giving up control, you get probate avoidance, you get Medicaid avoidance planning or Medicaid planning for getting the house out of your name, right? So it works out well for Medicaid planning, and it also gives you the probate avoidance piece, but you may get the problem of the kids or the beneficiaries taking your cost basis and having to pay capital gains down the road. So remember, when we're talking about property, when we're talking about vacation property, when we're talking about protecting the beach house, and today we're talking about the beach house, because why? Because we're here at the beach. Revocable trust, you stay in control, goes to the beneficiaries, step up in basis, no Medicaid protection. Deed with the life estate, step up in basis, no probate. Medicaid planning perspective, from Medicaid planning, it works out really well from that perspective, but you may not want those kids to own that property together for a whole host of reasons. And then the third option is, how about an irrevocable trust? You get Medicaid planning protection, you get probate avoidance protection, you may run into some problems with capital gains down the road. Now, one other thing that we always talk about with our clients when we're talking about the beach house, again, vacation houses in general, but beach house for the purposes of this discussion, why? Because we're at the beach, is that when this situation arises, something happens and the kids inherit property, or there's property involved, you usually get 3 or 4 different types of personalities who show up at the table, okay? And the personalities, son, daughter, niece, nephew, it doesn't matter. But these are the types of personalities that tend to show up in these situations, okay? The first personality is the kid or the child or whatever you want to call it, who says, look, I love the beach. Mom and dad had a beach house. I enjoyed going every single day of our life. I loved all the memories we made down there. I could buy it. You know, if people wanted to sell the property and keep it in the family, I could buy it. I can afford it. I can afford the ongoing maintenance. What do people want to do, right? So you have this person who's very involved, very interested in owning the property down the road, and they can afford to buy everybody out, and they can afford the ongoing maintenance and upkeep costs that go along with it. It's a very straightforward. So that's one person in your family who's going to be at the table having this discussion. Now, there's another person at the table, very similar to this person, and it's a slightly different scenario. It's a person who loves the beach house, who loves going to the beach house, and for a whole host of reasons, doesn't matter why, but for a whole host of reasons, cannot afford to either buy everybody out of the beach house, or they may not even be able to hang on to and control or cover the cost of their ownership of the beach house if everybody wanted to keep the property together. It's a sibling who might have made a whole bunch of choices that put them in a position where they say, look, I love coming to the beach. I loved it, and when mom and dad owned it, it was a thrill and we made great memories. But on my own, or as part of this co-ownership that we're discussing, there's no way that I could afford to do this. I can't afford to be in it, I can't afford to stay with it, and I can't afford to buy you guys out. And the challenge is that in some cases, that individual wants everybody to own it, because what they're looking for is they're looking for some type of family subsidy to kind of take over and make sure that they can kind of ride everybody else's coattails so that they can kind of get the benefits of the beach house, but they can spread the costs out and really kind of ride that along with everybody else, knowing that they couldn't do it on their own, so they need everybody to kind of stay in it for this to continue for them. So again, that's a second person that might be at the table. The third person that might be at the table is somebody who says, look, I have zero interest in the beach house, okay? I'm a mountain person, I'm a lake person, I never liked going to the beach, I don't like the sand, I don't like the sun, I don't like the salt. Mom and dad had it, it was great, I really enjoyed using it, I really enjoyed going there, but I have no interest in owning this, because either they just have no interest flat out because it's just not something that appeals to them, or geographically it doesn't make sense. We see situations on the Cape all the time where somebody says, look, my parents owned a place on the Cape, I live on the West Coast, I really don't come back to the East Coast all that much. I really have no interest in being connected to the property, to the Cape House. I'd really much rather just kind of have a check, have somebody buy me out, and then you're going to go back to the other people at the table and say, well, we have one sibling who can buy them out, we have another sibling who can't buy them out, and they want them to stay in the deal, and that person, that family member says, I don't want to stay in the deal because it just doesn't do anything for me, right? So it creates a problem, and it sometimes can create some animosity between the person who needs them to stay in and the person who doesn't want to stay in, because the person who needs them to stay in says, look, I need you to stay in this because not only can I not afford the house on my own, but if you step away, the percentage ownership costs shift to me. So without you, I have to bear an even greater burden of owning the house with my siblings, if that's an option, and I can't afford to do it. I can barely afford to do it if we all do it. If you step away and you want to get a check and a buyout, I can't afford to buy you out, and I can't afford the increased carrying costs. So now you got three people at the table. You got one person who says, I got no interest. I have another person who says, I could absolutely buy everybody out for the right reasons, right? I want to own the house and I can afford to do it. And then you have a third person who says, I don't think I can afford to own it on my own. I definitely can't afford to own it on my own. Or I can't afford to own it I can barely afford to own it if we own it together. And the minute somebody steps out, the scales tilt and they definitely can't own it. That can create some family disharmony, okay? And then there's another person at the table. This person sometimes tends to be the person who said, look, I'm gonna move into the vacation house. I'm gonna move into the beach house. I'll take care of mom. I'll take care of dad. And then as a result of doing that, they have somehow assumed, or they feel like they've assumed, some ownership piece of the puzzle, right? I've been here taking care of mom. I've been here taking care of dad. This is my home. And if we lose the vacation property, or if we sell the vacation property, I'm homeless. And I can't afford, with whatever share I might get of this vacation property, I can't afford to go buy another place. So I want all of you to stay in the game. I want all of you to continue to own this property, basically subsidizing my primary residence where I want to live. And oh, by the way, you owe this to me because I took care of mom and dad. Maybe they did. Maybe they did it and they just chose to do it on their own. There was no family discussion that says, hey, if you move in and you take care of mom and dad, this is the deal. In many cases, they just decided to do it. And now the expectation is that is somehow going to result in them staying in the property. And then you're supposed to subsidize their ownership of the property with the idea that at some point in the future down the road, if something ever happens to them, then the house would be sold, then the proceeds would be split. So again, these are the 4 or 5 different folks that might show up at the party in terms of discussing how this property should be handled. So what we try to constantly advise our clients is to take control of this situation. You, as the beach house owner, take control of this situation. Figure out early on who wants to be in, who might be in, how it's going to go. Is there an interest in joint ownership? Is that joint ownership even feasible? What would it look like? Can they even afford it? Or do you have to make sure that you leave a certain amount of money in addition to the real estate to make sure that that property is handled properly the way you want it to be handled? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to emphasize everybody to focus on your ownership of the beach house. Make sure that you understand going forward what the best way to own that property is, and then what the best way for that property to get handled with the dynamics of who you want to own this property, so that the property that has brought you so much joy and so many great memories can pass on to the people that you truly want that property to pass on to. So this is Jay Marsden, Marsden Law, down here at the beach, talking about the beach house. And if you have any questions, give us a ring at your convenience, 508-858-5324. We'd love to talk about your beach house and all the memories it's brought you and how we can help you save it. Have a great day. Thanks for watching.